Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Price. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Texas, Colorado, and Alaska. Welcome to Priceless Advocacy. Here, we aim to advocate for the school counselor and counselor profession, not only for those inside the profession, but for those outside of it. And so I'm really happy that you're here. Today's topic is advocating for school counselor roles to be taught in principal preparation programs. For my usual spiel, I do not represent my university nor my employers for Priceless Advocacy. This is solely me representing myself. Let's get into today's topic. Why this topic matters. School counselors support academic, career, and social emotional development for students. This ranges across both direct and indirect services, advocacy for the program, providing with mental health support, ensuring that students are successful not only in their academic settings but post-graduation, and ensuring along the way that students have a place to go to and talk and be supported. And students' needs are increasingly becoming more difficult post-COVID. School counseling is becoming more difficult post-COVID. Warren et al. Found that in 2024. And unfortunately, the roles of school counselors are often misunderstood, and principals shape those school counselor roles' implementation. And so if they don't understand what the school counselor roles are, then that's going to directly impact the effectiveness of those school counselors. The core problem, there is role ambiguity and there's been expanding responsibilities of school counselors, and this leads to the overwork of school counselors, which means less students are being able to be served. There is an assignment of non-counseling duties by administrators who are simply not educated on counselor roles. And so this lack of education leads to inadequate administrator supervision, which creates burnout, turnover attention, and attrition of school counselors, basically meaning that there is going to be fewer school counselors to serve those students if this doesn't change. So, from historical context, the roles of school counselors have expanded over time, beginning in guidance counselors to the current roles as school counselors. And there's been so many roles added over that time. Testing, having those direct services, having indirect services, monitoring the school counseling program, assessing the school counseling program, making sure that everything is data driven at this point. And there's been few responsibilities that have been removed over the 100 years of the profession. And throughout that time, there has been persistent confusion between school counselors' perceptions of their roles and the stakeholders, whether that be the administrators, whether that be those outside of the school, whether that even be at legislative levels. So it's important to be able to look at the current ASCA model. That is the model that says what school counselors should be doing in their schools. It outlines the appropriate uh, duties of those school counselors and what the goal of those school counseling programs is supposed to be. And so it's important to understand that principal understanding matters. Principals, as we've discussed, they define those school counselor roles as the supervisor. And unfortunately, 27% of administrators understand the role to a great extent, while only 42% know it adequately. That was from the ASCA State of the Union back in 2021. Phi et al. In 2018 found that 26.4 of principals were not familiar with the ASCA model. And as I just told you, the ASCA model states what school counselors should be doing. So if only 27% of them know it to a great extent, only 42% know it adequately, that means that there is a majority of administrators that don't know what the school counselor role is. And they directly influence that ASCA model implementation. And so this misunderstanding leads to misuse of school counselors. They are largely being put into administrative and clerical roles, or testing and coordinating roles, rather than directly supporting those students. So the effects of this role misalignment is burnout and stress for those school counselors. You're going to have turnover and tension. You're going to have reduced student services as they're not able to be supported in the way that they should. There's going to be large caseloads. Right now, most states are over the 250 to 1 ratio. There was only 3 states that were less than that. And there's frequently inappropriate counselor duties. Wilder et al. Found that 80% of principals that he looked at assigned inappropriate counseling duties to their schools, as that is what their school counselors were supposed to be doing. And this leads to reduced alignment from that school counselor principal relationship, reduced collaboration, which Clemens et al. 2009 talks about the importance of that collaboration. And we're going to talk a little bit more later about that collaboration. But whenever we have this misalignment, plain and simply, school counselors aren't being used in the way that's going to best serve students and therefore best serve those schools. So, some student and school impact. This leads to reduced access to counseling services for students because school counselors are having to do other duties outside of the counseling services that they're supposed to be providing. And most students, the only mental health professional they see are these school counselors. So if they're not receiving those services, they're being drastically impacted. There can be weak implementation of programs. You're going to have a negative school climate. This is going to lead to reduced collaboration between the school counselor and their principal. And this means less emotional reward for the school counselors as they're not able to provide the type of services that they not only went to school to do, but in their head are saying, hey, this is how I can best serve these students. And I'm not able to do that. So without having appropriate roles, you're going to have less school counselors having that emotional reward. And how long do you think people can go into a role that they know isn't effective, that they know isn't being the way that it is supposed to be, before that burnout takes over? So, some benefits to schools, therefore, let's look at the opposite side. If you're having aligned roles, you're going to have better collaboration, and if principals are educated, is what I'm talking about here for the benefits of schools. Having the collaboration is a direct result of of principals knowing what the school counselor role is. You're going to have better counseling programs. You're going to have improved student outcomes. There's going to be more consistency in that counselor program because counselors aren't going to be leaving. And you can even have RAMP status, which is a recognized ASCA model program. For principals out there, that is a way that you can advertise for your school of, hey, look at how good we are doing. Look at how supported our students are. We are a recognized ASCA model program, and principals out there and school counselors who are sending this to your principals, you have to know you are a major aspect of getting that status. So it's important that you know what those school counselor roles are, so that way you can listen to that advocacy whenever they're coming to you and saying, hey, this is what we need to be doing. And for school counselors, I recommend continuously having that advocacy role. That's what Wilder found that is super important. That's what so many authors in the school council literature talk about, continuously advocating for your roles. Unfortunately, principals are being set up to fail because they don't have the exposure to those school counseling roles in their leadership preparation programs. They don't have a lot of training in those programs to knowing what those roles are, and this leads to the role confusion. So it's not like principals are going out here and actively saying, I don't want them to do what the ASCA model is. Oftentimes, they just don't know. And so, by starting in those principal preparation programs, I believe that this can make more effective principals and more effective school counselors, therefore, better, essentially more effective schools for those students. So, I'm advocating for principal preparation programs to change. By training principals in the school counselor roles, we can reduce the inappropriate duties, we can improve that school counselor utilization, we can strengthen the school mental health systems, we can reduce that burnout and attrition, we have increased counselor effectiveness, and improved student outcomes. One of the first ones that we can look at is from Gisa et al. From 2020. So they went in and they created a framework for pre-service preparation because they found whenever they were reviewing their participants that most principals had little to no knowledge of proper school counselor roles. And so what they did was they created a framework that could be taught in principal preparation programs that had 6 elements. Those are the introduction to comprehensive school counseling, the roles of school counselor and the administrator, delivery and management of counseling services, professionalism, ethics, and legal issues, evidence-based accountability and improvement processes, and family and community partnerships and engagements. And they said, okay, hey, we found that this has been effective. We found that this allowed principals and school counselors to know more about these roles. And they said, hey, let's go ahead and introduce this across a couple of different places that you can have that. You can have it in Introduction to Educational Leadership. You can have that in the uh, I'm sorry, in the Human Resource Development, in Educational Decision Making. You can have that in the school principal class itself and the principal internship class. Like those are all different areas that you can have that program in and have this model, this framework for improving principals' knowledge of school counselor roles. We also have Gonzalez et al. In 2022. And what they did was they created a training for post graduation for principals and school counselors so that way they could learn each other's roles more. And here are the results. So, most gained clear insights into the responsibilities of their professional counterparts. They recognize that roles are often misunderstood or misused, leading to inappropriate duties. Participants felt more prepared to collaborate and advocate for their roles. Some experienced a shift from a hierarchical perception to viewing roles as more collaborative. The intervention helped reduce those power dynamics and foster that social capital, which if you go back to Clemens et al., that's what that entire paper is about, is improving that social capital and how that benefits student success. And so the participants in Gonzalez et al. Valued the practical, real-world nature of the collaborative activities and expressed increased confidence in working with their counterparts. So my advocacy message is that role confusion is a leadership issue. That starts with those principals, and that can start with that principal preparation program. Almost all of the school counseling literature says build a relationship with your principal, advocate for your program to be effective, advocate for your role to be effectively implemented. And so my thought process is if they know what those roles are, that makes that advocacy a whole lot easier. And that means that students are going to be better served. And without this change, more counselors will leave the school counseling profession, which is going to impact not only the schools, but those students as well, as they're not going to have that consistency. They're going to have to consistently rebuild those relationships, and they're just not going to have the correct services. So I'm saying for the preparation programs that principals need formal training in those programs, principal preparation programs should look at GISA et al. As an example of ways to do that. And then for trainings for post-graduation, such as Gonzalez et al., and looking at those, this would allow for principals to currently gain knowledge of the school counselor roles for those currently in the field. And to have a greater collaboration between school counselors and principals, which is only going to benefit students. Here are the references. Please look at these. These are wonderful references that are really good literature. And so until next time, remember, advocacy has a cost, change has a cost, but the results can be priceless. Please like, share, and subscribe, and please post any future advocacy topics in the comments below. Thank you.